revision stream. We're on a pretty good streak with these now. Yesterday we did a lot in terms of the witch craze topic. We went over East Anglia, we went over Bamberg, and we were able to cover the entire spread of those topics very well. So obviously we'll keep cracking on with the witch craze, looking at North Berwick, Lancashire and Salem. And then in terms of the witch craze, there's not much else to really go over, apart from like the skeptic cases. So might be done with that by next week, which is good. But today we're not looking at the witch craze, we're not looking at the US, we are looking back at Britain Transformed, which is of course paper one, which is coming very soon, and I am going to go and revise. We're looking at race relations. So there is a whole section on women, which I'm completely moving past because we have a mock tomorrow that's on race relations, which means as much as I'd love to talk about this, there's not... In fact, women is literally like 2 pages. Hold on. Are there 2 pages? Are there literally 2 sections on women? Oh my god, there might literally be 2. Okay, hold on. We might be able to go over women. I thought this was going to be like 20 pages long. No, it's literally a page. Okay. Let's have a quick look then at women. So, the changing status of women. Obviously, big important one. Representation of the People Act. This is a big one to talk about if you get a question on anything to do with, you know, the roughly the 1918-ish time period. Because you can talk about how, you know, that led to a shift politically, you know, with Labour being able to get votes, more working class voters. But the Representation of the People Act also focused around women. The vote was extended to women over the age of 30. And then eventually it was extended 10 years later, so Roper was 1918. A decade later in 1928, it was extended to all women over the age of, I'm guessing just all ages. So above 18. After various campaigns put pressure on MPs, so I guess that's the justification, due to pressure on MPs. But overall, the Representation of the People Act, if you were doing a paragraph on the Representation of the People Act, you would talk about how political influence, there was not much political influence for women. For example, there were only 17 women who stood as candidates in 1918 and only one won. So only one woman in 1918, woman MP in 1918. Women's rights groups became split and membership fell. And the parties did not want to risk a female candidate. So political parties didn't want to risk female candidates. So that's why they had way less political influence, because they didn't want to risk it. So that is the interwar years and the political advancement. There's not a lot. There's not a lot of change in the interwar years, apart from Roper, which was a big change, allowing for the vote, but politically not much. That's easy, and that's like a quarter of a topic done with. Next, World War II. So if we were doing a 3-part essay, and the question was, there was some advancement in the rights of women, 1918 to 79. That could be section 1, this could be section 2. You have jobs. More jobs due to World War II in traditional male fields. That's a very nice thing to talk about. Jobs traditionally in male work because men were off fighting, obviously. You know, that just makes sense. Percentage of women who worked as engineers in transport of a chemical industry rose 14%. Rose from 14 to 33%. Okay, that's a decent statistic, but that's kind of a pretty specific one. I don't know whether that would indicate much. After World War II, it triggers the desire to move beyond, the house life. A Guardian survey says 50% of housewives report being bored. I guess you could mention that, but I think the more prevalent idea here is after the war, women are forced out of work, but most aren't. So not as many forced out of work. Cool. That's nice. By 1951, a quarter of married women worked. 1971, half did. That's a good statistic. 1/4 in 1951, and is a nice 71. Okay. That is a very, very nice statistic there. I would probably consider that like the golden statistic there. It basically doubled the amount of women working. And this is married women. So, also it led to more semi-skilled and unskilled jobs, so it became easier for women to work. Shift, more unskilled / semi-skilled jobs. So, apologies, I'm still ill. If we got an exam question now, talking about, let's say the question was, 1918 to 79, there was little advancement for women. That could be a first section to talk about. You could say, I somewhat agree because political influence was very limited, parties didn't want to risk female candidates. However, the Representation of the People Act was a big change. Then World War II, you could say that it created jobs in more traditional male fields. It didn't create jobs. It led to women working jobs in traditional male fields. Not as many women were forced out of work as they were in World War One. Use that statistic to talk about married women working and the shift. And then let's have a look at the final. I feel like I know what the final bit's going to be on. It's going to be on liberal laws. Oh, there's a bit about the welfare state too. Oh, this kind of links to liberal. Okay, I'll just put liberal as a final paragraph. And that's all there is on women. I literally thought I would be sat here for an hour, but no, this topic is fairly short. That's a very fairly short topic. Oh, okay. So, all that's next is race and immigration. Okay. Welfare state, the Family Allowance Act. Yes, I remember this. In fact, I'll write the acts in red so that when I'm looking back at this, it'll be easier to remember. No acts for World War II. But the thing, that's kind of the thing with Britain Transformed. The welfare state topic has a shit ton of acts to remember. Like a lot of acts to remember. The liberal bit does have acts, but they're all very generic names. Like, literally the Murder Act, the Abortion Act, the Marriage Reform Act, or the Divorce Reform Act. The names are that generic, I can't even think of them. What else is there? the Sexual Offences Act, um, the Obscene Publications Act. Like, it's kind of piss easy, and like, the Family Planning Act. So, this is looking at the Family Allowance Act, which I keep forgetting is a thing. But that obviously gave payments to the mothers instead of, the family itself, which I think you could talk a lot about the significance there. Okay, hold on. There is a tiny bit more about politics, very quickly. There's little representation in Parliament. Which I think is implied anyways. Female MPs were often very talented due to having overcome large opposition, which again is common sense really. And Barbara Castle introduced the Equal Pay Act. So, if you were now asked an exam question on if it said there was little change in the status of women, you could say, yeah, there was little change politically, but there was this. Counter argument talking about World War II changing the status. Then liberal would also be a counter argument. But there will be limitations to the liberal society. Because again, for every paragraph, you want to talk about what you agree with, but then you want to also talk about the limitations to the source. Not the source, the topic itself. You know what I mean. Like, that's the whole thing with history. Like, you can't just be one-sided. You can't, glaze the hell out of World War II for increasing jobs without also looking at the downsides and the negatives. So always look at both kind of sides, because it's kind of helpful. So yeah, the Family Allowance Act, payments went to the mother. So that's a massive change, because it's providing welfare. The NHS introduced free healthcare from women. Obviously, the NHS as a whole, like that, the NHS is kind of like a glue that you can use to, like, stick any question in better. I'm not going to write that down just because it's kind of simple. The pill was introduced, which was made available in the NHS, giving women greater sexual freedom. Obviously, it's going to mention it on here, but the Abortion Act too was very significant. Here's an interesting... Okay, well, hold on. Another statistic is... Do people pronounce it midwifery or midwifery? I don't know how it's pronounced. Death during birth fell from 1 in 1,000 to 0.18 in 1,000. That's a good statistic. And what would that be? Death during birth. The big kind of controversy here is the 1946 National Insurance Act. So the NI Act was limited because it classed non-working wives as dependents, so they could not claim benefits. So unemployed wives, no benefits. Now, of course, there's a little bit more about the liberal legislation. The Abortion Act is... we've literally gone over this in one of the previous streams. The Abortion Act was significant. The issue with that act is it focused more on the fact that it was, I think, was his name David Steele? Somebody Steele. he focused more on the actual deaths caused by these backstreet abortions over the moral issue, which was a case for a lot of the liberal laws, where the MPs focused more on how it would help people over the actual public perception. So things like the Murder Act, a lot of MPs have been convinced to abolish the death penalty. Meanwhile, most people didn't want it gone, which is shown by things like the Moors murders, where there's public outcry because they want the death penalty back. So yeah, we don't really need to go into depth. It's literally the Abortion Act. Not even going to put these in red. Abortion Act, Divorce Reform Act. If you're good at topic 3, which I think I'm okay at, to be honest, like, out of all of the themes, this is the nicest one. Because everything links together in a really nice web. If you're okay at this theme, then, you don't need an in-depth explanation about the Abortion Act or the Divorce Reform Act. So, that is everything for women. Literally, that was 2 pages. We took maybe 20 minutes to do that. And that is helpful as hell, because I'll be honest, I forgot all of this. I did completely forget all of this. But this is insanely helpful. So I'm going to take a screenshot of that for later, so I can actually use this to revise. Please take a screenshot. Okay. So let's quickly go over this just so we know. First of all, if we were asked in an exam a question such as, there was little change in the status of women 1918 to 79, which I think has come up, so I don't know, but if you were asked that question, and the other choice was something disgusting like politics, then this is a godsend of a question. Number 1, your first argument would be the interwar years. Representation of a People Act. It was significant. It meant that by 1928, women of all ages could vote due to the pressure that were put on MPs in order to extend ROPA. The Equal Pay Act was introduced very much later, which highlighted the growing political influence of women. However, politically, there was only one woman as an MP in 1918 because parties didn't want to associate with female candidates because they were risky. So you have a couple good bits, couple bad bits. World War II, I would say, is all positive. Because men were out fighting, traditional male fields were open for women, and after the war, not as many were forced out of work, unlike World War I. That's a change. And in 20 years, it went from a quarter to half of married women being in work, and this was a big shift, really, because it was the first time, really, that married women began to express a desire to, not be in the household. There's a shift because, oh my god, I'm sweating my ass off. There's a shift because women are getting access to more unskilled and semi-skilled jobs. Then the third argument is mostly positive, talking about the liberal laws. Things like the Family Allowance Act, in which payments were paid to the mother. The National Insurance Act was limited, however. It classified unemployed wives as not getting any benefits. The pill introduced greater sexual freedoms, and there's a lot less deaths in childbirth. The Abortion Act and the Divorce Reform Act introduced greater freedoms too. So, overall, that is everything about women in Britain Transformed. That is a lovely, lovely topic. I thought that was going to be a nightmare. I can't lie. And yeah, our question tomorrow isn't on women, but I can't lie, that would be a lovely question to get this year. A question on theme 3 is a guaranteed pass. Like, it really is. Like, everything connects together so well. Unlike theme 1, where it's, you got a bit of consensus, but then it begins to drift away from consensus, and you have, at the beginning, a divide in the Liberal Party, and then, this I don't even know the name of it. The thing before consensus government. National government. Yeah, you have that. Yeah, it's a I don't it's a lot of bollocks. But anyways, race relations. This is a big chunk. This is a big chunk. So I can't be asked to go over all of this. We'll just do notes. Because yeah, I'm a lazy bastard. Oh, please forgive me. Just gonna write this on my calendar. Okay. So, and now we're looking at British attitudes to ethnic minorities. I already know a tad bit about this. Well, I'd hope I do, because we've done exam questions on this before. How have they changed? Firstly, I'm literally just going to put bullet points. Right, in terms of acts, there is a big one, the Aliens Order Act, which I believe, I'm just going to recount some shit from memory and then we'll actually look into it. This act made it so that you had to register with the police if you were an immigrant searching for work, which made it easier to identify immigrants. So register. We can also talk about the limits of trade unions. Trade unions did not fight for minorities. They did not fight for minority rights in work. Only, white people. Where is that written? Trade unions fought for the rights of white workers to take the jobs of non-whites. So yeah, trade unions were highly oppressive towards this. They focused on white jobs over minority jobs. I keep bouncing between calling it different things, like minority, ethnic minorities. I don't know whether it matters in the exam what you said, particularly. I guess we can talk quickly about the actual consistency of the communities. Following World War One, that is a big not a big turning point, but there's mainly a turning point because you have more Black and Asian communities. And this is primarily due to labourers and soldiers from the West Indies and Africa. Anti-Semitism. There were 300,000 Jewish immigrants excluded. I'm reading the wrong thing. Oh yeah, fucking Oswald Mosley. I forget about him. Oswald Mosley and the British Union of Fascists. He targeted Jewish immigrants, basically just a knockoff Hitler. Obviously a big link to work. There's a lot of links to work here, which makes sense. The International African Service Bureau established a newspaper. That's not the thing I'm looking... But this is what I'm looking for. The League of Colored People reported that 80% of Black and Asian men have been unemployed for a prolonged period. That's an insane statistic. 80% of Black and Asian people being unemployed for a prolonged period. That highlights the oppressive nature of the trade unions. It highlights how these communities established after World War One were heavily oppressed. The Aliens Order Act required migrant workers to register with the police before seeking work, or you would be deported. There's another act, the Special Restrictions Act, which forced seamen of colour to prove their citizenship or face deportation. And that's the Restrictions Act. So you had to... So seamen... What does it say? Prove their British citizenship. So, that is a massive negative, right? If you were in an exam and you got a question talking about how there was significant change in the status of ethnic minorities 1918 to 79, I'm just giving a generic question there, then yes, there is massive change because look at where it started. Look at this, 80% unemployment, being targeted by the government with the Aliens Order Act, the Special Restrictions Act, the British Union of Fascists. I remember another thing, it's not written down here, but it was the British Communist Party. The Communist Party was the only political party that really fought for ethnic minority rights, which is insane. That is an insane fact. Obviously, as well, I'll mention the colour bar. The colour bar was significant because it meant literally they didn't want minorities to have the jobs. Discriminatory workers' rights, people of colour excluded from employment and denied access to healthcare. That could be a segue into talking about welfare, if you really wanted to. If you wanted to make a topic the impact of a welfare state on minorities, that could be a nice slide. So, that is it. Let's look at these. So that's for interwar years, 18 to 39, and it's a lot of shit. This is not good at all. Then World War II comes along and the status has massively changed. And then, as time begins to go on, the status does become a lot more withered. You have things like, I don't know his name, the guy, is it Enoch Powell? The guy that gives the Rivers of Blood speech. He's a significant reason, well, a significant showcase of how ethnic minorities and their status did begin to decline again. You had things like Teddy Boy riots, shit like that really highlighted this growing intolerance. So, honestly, if you were in an exam, you could argue that, yeah, there was limited change in the status of ethnic minorities. I know I haven't written it down yet, but yeah, you could reasonably argue it just by thinking about it. Obviously, you would have to have a disagree, and the disagree would be World War II, but yeah, you could definitely argue it. Right, understand how immigration changed World War II. Again, I'm going to try and not take up as much of your guys' time. We've been live for half an hour. We could probably get this done in another 10 if we tried. So, let's go home early today. So, during the Second World War, many many Commonwealth citizens fought and died. The British Nationality Act. Oh, this fucking pen. I need to buy my whiteboard pens. These guys are dropping dead. Oh, this is a good pen. The British Nationality Act. I'm going to put a big star on that, because that is a significant act. Massive act. It means that any member of a Commonwealth country gains British citizenship? So there was an exam question which referred to new Commonwealth migration. All that's referring to is this time period here. This is, I guess, Commonwealth migration, because again, you have Black and Asian communities being soldiers from, the Indies, Africa. This is new Commonwealth migration. So that's the difference, if you were confused. So it was the Labour government, which is ironic now because Labour's doing fuck all. This said that all citizens were British citizens. They had the right to settle in Britain. The earliest immigrants came from India, West Indies, India, Pakistan, West Indies. So, Indies, I also know places like the Caribbean. And overall, this is a change. You want to talk about that if you get asked it in an exam. This is a change. Here, the communities are primarily only Black and Asian, and they are soldiers mainly from the Indies and Africa. This is a change post-World War II with the passing of the British Nationality Act because it's more diverse. There is a larger, I don't know what the word would be. It's more widespread. It's more widespread. And I remember this being in a mark scheme. I remember them saying this in a mark scheme. Some shit about, how more widespread. It led to chains of immigration. Chains of immigration. Because, one family member comes, then another, then another, then another. The National Health Service had been set up. Transport was nationalised. So, the welfare state, the impact of welfare state. The NHS had been set up, transport had been nationalised. Advertising campaigns were started to attract workers. And there's a massive influx of almost 500,000. So between 1955 and 62, influx of around 500,000. Crazy, by the way. Wages in Britain were much higher, so the standard of living was rising quickly. Cool. Is that everything about this? Please be enough. Please. Okay, cool. The final section, how immigration changed after World War II. Oh no, this is still the same bit. Bollocks, I'm going to run out of space. Bollocks, okay, that's fine. Understanding how immigration changed after World War II. Immigrants often found themselves, I remember this, living in the poorest accommodation in the worst areas. Some areas attracted, the white flight, I remember this. So, they lived mainly in the poorest areas of big cities, which led to white flight, which sounds like some fucking, COVID knockoff, as the white population began to move due to the amount of minorities. Well, due to the amount of immigrants. The colour bar was still prevalent. So that is a continuity. So the colour bar was still prevalent. Trade unions didn't support. Those who found work were offered the lowest paid unskilled jobs, and they were paid 28% less pay and unskilled jobs. And finally, there is the change. So this is everything post New Commonwealth migration. So, let's have a look quickly. Let's do a quick little recap. So, things are bad. Things are very bad in the interwar years. There's not a lot of good here. The government is oppressing with the Aliens Order Act, the Special Restrictions Act, the colour bar, fact 80% are unemployed for trade unions. You can also talk about the nature of these migrants themselves. Post-World War II, with the British Nationality Act, there is change. There is a more widespread migration, chains of migration. The fact that there's a big influx of people, almost 500,000. The standard of living for ethnic minorities rose because wages were higher in Britain than other Commonwealth countries, and the foundation of a welfare state needed workers. However, there were flaws. 28% less pay than whites, and they were usually given unskilled jobs. The colour bar still came massively into play with landlords not serving immigrants at all, and often immigrants would find themselves in the poorest areas of the big cities. White flight occurred because that many immigrants made their way into those areas that the original white population moved out. Cool. Well, it's not cool, I just say that. Right. Let's talk quickly about the race riots. Which is a significant factor. Because I think that got the involvement of a Caribbean government. Let's have a look. Rice riot in 1950. So, gangs fought each other. I'll just put Teddy Boy riots because they strongly opposed. Notting Hill riots. And that was a turning point because 3% of immigrant population 3% of the Caribbean population went back to the Caribbean, which got the government to complain. And the Caribbean government got involved. They complained about the poor treatment, the prejudice, the poor housing. So that is a turning point. The race riots were a turning point. You could also yap about the Notting Hill Carnival if you wanted to promote racial harmony, but honestly, like, if you're gonna yap about this, let's have a look. This is such a badly formatted like slideshow. Okay. We can finally look at an act again. This is the 1962 Commonwealth Immigrants Act. Commonwealth Immigrants Act. This stated that only immigrants with jobs waiting for them or those possessing certain skills would be allowed. So, it changed it to those awaiting jobs / skilled people. Skilled workers. Immigrants had to apply for a voucher and it was limited to 9,000 a year. And this was not a thing in Australia, Canada, New Zealand. New Zealand, Australia, Canada. Because those are where the white immigrants are. The situation got worse due to the National Front established. The National Front, basically just a knockoff of the Reform Party. It opposed immigration. It had about 20k members, but it didn't gain support. No political impact. Cool. How did it change? The 1968 Commonwealth Immigrants Act restricted it further. 9,000 places a year to 1,500, and you must have a close relative in order to access the country. 80% believe there were too many immigrants. Which I think is a very ironic and also memorable number, because at the beginning of this time period, 80% of Black and Asians are unemployed, obviously due to things like the colour bar, the lack of union support. Then we go over here to, the late 60s, and 80% say there's too many immigrants, but it's a memorable statistic. The 1971 Immigration Act, you needed a work permit. All Commonwealth citizens needed work permits unless you were born in Britain or had lived there. So, the number rose very rapidly of immigrants. So we're looking at the causes here, which I guess we can kind of backtrack to. A influx of immigration. So this is just if you want to explain the context in an exam question. Almost 500,000 people. Extra labour was not needed. Extra labour wasn't needed. They were becoming permanent settlers. Unemployment rose. So, that's just a very side rant. Finally, there were some good changes. In 65, discrimination banned. Banned discrimination. This was limited, as you could still do discrimination, just discreetly. So that was in 1968. And by 19... a ratio... banned any form of discrimination. Then finally, Enoch Powell gave the Rivers of Blood speech, which caused a lot of increased racial tensions. He was obviously sacked for what he said, but it rose racial tensions, and it became reflective of what the population thought. So, let's go over all of this one last time, and then I'm going to piss off. Right, almost been here for an hour, what the fuck, okay. 1918, in fact, we'll just skip this, we'll look at this. So, World War II is mostly positive, however there are still some issues. Poorest areas of the big cities were occupied primarily by immigrants, leading to white flight. The colour bar was still a very prevalent issue. Landlords didn't want to serve immigrants, and due to the colour bar, they were given unskilled work with 28% less pay. Now, because of the influx of immigration and permanent settlers, and the fact that the economy was beginning to go down, after the new Commonwealth migration settles, there's race riots in the late 50s. The Notting Hill riots were so bad that 3% of immigrants left to go back to the Caribbean, which got the Caribbean government's involvement. And by 1962, it's like the government gives in to these demands. The Commonwealth Immigrants Act is established, saying that only skilled labourers or those awaiting jobs could be allowed into the country. Only 9,000 of these vouchers were issued a year, except of course for the white immigrant countries. The political party, the National Front, was established, but this failed to make any waves. And this intensified in 1968 and 71. Firstly, the number of vouchers was decreased to 1,500, and then you just had to have a work permit to get in. However, there were some positive changes nonetheless. The Race Relations Act, firstly, which tried to ban discrimination in the colour bar, and this was reappealed in 1976 with a lot more success, racial equality. However, there were some issues still. 80% of people said there were too many immigrants, and the Rivers of Blood speech highlighted the racial tensions at the time and the social divisions. So, happy to leave it there for now. We've gone through a lot today. We've gone through half of that topic, half of theme 3. I'm knackered, honestly. I would usually, after doing this, hop onto my document and type it all up, but I'm knackered, to be honest. Today hasn't been the best of days. It's been a very long day. So, I'm happy to leave that there. And tomorrow, I will obviously go give this a read over before the exam. And yeah, let's